A while ago, maybe 10 plus years ago, I made this and another dining chair for our dining table. And of course, at the time, I had planned to make a couple chairs, see how they went, how it worked out, and then over the period of the next few years, make a total of 6. Well, it's now however many years later, and I'm finally getting back to making the rest of these chairs. So this particular chair I was very happy with. I made it based on a mock-up that I had built out of poplar and pocket screws and such. And I just wanted to make sure the dimensions were correct, the angles were good, thing was comfortable. And it's worked out really well. It's a nice chair. It's very sturdy. I like the back angle, though it's a little bit on the upright side, but it gives me good support in the back, and it's worked out really well. Now I want to make 2 more chairs that will be a little different than this one, then I'm going to make 2 more after that. So what am I going to do different this time? Well, number 1 is I want a different seat. A while ago, once again, I can't remember the timing, I took a class with David Johnson, and we made these benches, little stools. And I've always really liked Danish cord. I like how it looks. I like how it feels. I like that it's relatively lightweight. It's durable. I think it's awesome. So I'm going to use this material as the seat for the next dining chair. I'm going to angle the back just a little bit more, maybe just a degree. I need to change the stretcher system a bit because, of course, this is very different than that. And I think I've got everything worked out. So I made a drawing in SketchUp, a 3D drawing. And it's not perfect, but it gives me enough information to make the next 2 chairs. One of my goals is to lighten things up a little bit. This chair is a little on the hefty side. I mean, it's probably stronger than it needs to be. The parts are fairly thick. I think the legs are about 1 3/4, 1 5/8. This is about 1 3/4. So everything's going to get slimmed down a little bit. You can see the underside here. I'm going to have to do without these corner blocks because of how the stool, right? I can't put corner blocks in here. So I'm going to have double stretchers all the way around. And other than that, I think I'm pretty set. Same slat and stretcher system on the back. So I'm going to walk through in the next however many videos of how I'm going to make these 2 chairs. I'll show a picture on the screen now of the drawing, my SketchUp drawing of the chair. So you can see I've got all the parts laid out, and from that I can create a cut list. And like I said, it's not going to be perfect, but it'll be close enough for me to rough out the parts. The first thing I'll do in starting to make the chair is make the legs. Like with a lot of furniture projects, I want to start with the biggest parts first. So what I did in SketchUp is I printed the leg pattern full scale. And I'll show a picture of that here. Now, I just have a 8.5x11 printer, so what I usually do is I'll print it out with a straight line parallel to the leg and inch mark. So then I can tape the pieces together, and using that straight line and the inch marks, I can make sure that the parts are all aligned and the spacing's correct. I then tape those together. I'll stick that onto a piece of 1/4 inch Baltic birch, and then cut that out. So what I have is this pattern. And it's got some marks on here that tell me where a couple of the parts go. So basically, it's going to sit like this. The stretchers are going to sit here, coming out, of course, seat here. The the part is straight from here down and essentially from here down and from here up. So I just have this curve here. Of course, I lay this out, I cut it out on the bandsaw pretty close to the line, and then I will sand it using hand sanding or disc sander for some of these exterior or convex curves. And get everything as accurate as possible. I did a little fine tuning, and part of the way I do that, whenever I'm making a pattern like this that has curves, I like to feel the curve, because you can tell a lot if there's a little hiccup or something. And I typically, you can see I'm looking off into space here. It's easier if I don't look at it when I'm feeling that. Sometimes I'll close my eyes and does that curve feel right? Do I feel a bump here? Something that's out of place. I will also sight down this, and looking here, you can also sometimes see some discontinuities that you may not feel. So anyway, so I'm happy with this. I'm going to use this now to lay out the parts on some 8/4 material. I'm using cherry. And I will also use this to make a pattern routing jig so that I can use that and a nice router bit to shape these parts. So I'll walk through that process now. I've got my parts laid out on this 8/4 material now. So it's always a little bit of a challenge with funny shaped parts. So what I'm going to do, I've got two legs here and here, and I'm trying to avoid this knot. So I'm pretty close to the knot, but because of how the grain goes here, it's curved like this. I know this knot, right? Knots grow perpendicular to the grain, so the knot goes in that direction away from this part, and this part's going to be thinner than the rough material here, so I should be fine there. And then I've got a third one here, so I've stayed fairly close here, and this gives me some material I might be able to use here. And then for the fourth leg, I flip this over. And so I'm parallel this end, so I have more material here and here. And then the other legs, the front legs, I can easily get those here. I don't even need this full width. Now I was hoping to get the material for the back, the curved back, because that's also 2 inches thick. But I just don't have quite enough material here, and I looked through my stack of stuff, and I don't have anything else that's going to work, so I will have to buy another board for those parts. So what I'll do next, I'll go ahead and cut these out. So I'll cut this off on my radial arm saw, and the rest of this, I have to figure it out, because it's hard to manipulate these big boards in the bandsaw, but I don't really have a choice to make a lot of these cuts. I've got my parts all milled up now, except for the top and bottom curved rails on the seat back. I've got everything cut. The wood that I was using, I've had for probably 3 or 4 years, and so it was very stable. I was able to get pretty good yield out of it. Even had a little left over, but not enough to do those back pieces. The legs have been milled to thickness. But they're still rough on the front and back faces. So my next step is to pattern route these. Now I've got my pattern, and I have the old pattern routing jigs. I had to dig out of my stash of various pattern routing jigs from the past. And I still have the patterns or templates from the previous time I did the first two dining chairs. So these are going to be close, but not quite the same. So the way this works, I'm going to pin nail this onto here, and I will bandsaw pretty close to the line, and then I'll use a flush trim bit to make this match this. And then I will put some toggle clamps on here and use a router bit and clamp these on here and route them to shape. So I'll walk through that process as I go through it. I've got my template here and my pattern. So I'm just going to trace on here. You can see how this current version, these edges are straighter than before. So it's not that critical how I do this. So on the ends, I'll take a, well, since this is straight, I can just do this. And what I like to do is bring that off as a curve. So I'll take a French curve and just make that head off a little bit because I want to, curve down into the cut when I do that. So I'll go ahead and cut this on the bandsaw, and then I'll show you how I trim it on the router table. So the jig is cut pretty close to my line now, so I'm going to use a 23 gauge pin nailer to hold this in place. And I'll use a flush trim bit to trim that, trim the jig flush with the template. I've got a flush trim bit in the router table. So flush trim bit for me means the bearing is on the end of the bit. And I've got, of course, the height set so that the carbide is just taller than the pattern here, or the jig. Now I should point out one of the reasons I use a 1/4 inch plywood for the pattern is it's relatively easy to work because it's thin, but it's just thick enough where I can do this. The bearing rides on here, and it's kind of the sweet spot, right? I could use 1/2 inch material, but it's harder to cut, harder to sand. Thinner, I wouldn't be able to do this because there's just not enough material there to work with. So 1/4 inch Baltic birch works really well for this. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll route this. Okay, pattern comes off. And usually the pin nails, since they're longer in this piece, they're 1/2 inch long. They stay in here, so I'll go ahead and pull these out. And then I'll switch to the other jig and do that one also. I'm going to use toggle clamps to hold the part onto my jig. And the first one that I route, and in this case I don't think it matters. Sometimes it matters because in some situations you're going to be routing uphill or downhill more than the other. In this case, it's going to be the same up and down or down and up, whatever. So I'm not worried about that. But, of course, my parts that I roughed out are a little bit oversized. So when I first put the part on here, because both sides are rough, I need to, of course, make sure I'm overhanging a little bit where I'm going to be routing. But on the back side, I don't know exactly where it's going to be at. Whereas on the second routing, I'll have a defined surface. So in that case, I will have some stops that put me in the right position. So for this first one, and I'm hoping these are going to work. So what I can do to position these is put that in place and see if my toggle clamps are, yeah, so that one's going to work fine. And I think, yeah, that one's going to work fine. So obviously, you know, these have been set up before. So I use quarter 20 bolts to hold these on. I use spacers to hold them up, and typically you want to have the toggle clamp raised up approximately the thickness of your part. These are 1 5/8. I'm going to use 1 3/4 inch spacers. And you know, I've got a whole gaggle of bits and pieces, bolts, and different spacers depending on what I'm doing here. Oh, and I should also say, so on the back side of this, I've got T-nuts. So what I would do the first time out, you know, figure out where these are going to go, drill through, then counterbore on the back side so the T-nut is, you know, not sticking out from this surface, and be good to go. I've also have some handles here that are held on in the same way. I typically have a cove cut on the sides of this just to make it easier to grab. But I guess I don't on that one, but not that big a deal. So anyway, I'll go ahead and assemble this, and we'll route some legs. I'm set up and ready to route this now. I've got my workpiece clamped on here. I do have some self-stick sandpaper underneath here just to give me a little extra grip. I've got a stop at this end. Just held on with a self-tapping screw because, of course, as I'm routing this, it's going to tend to want to push this direction. And the bit that I'm using, this is an end mill I typically use for metalworking that's been modified to fit in a 1/2 inch collet. It's got a bearing added to it. And this whole process was something that John Nyquist came up with many, many years ago. And when I was taking classes from him, we would occasionally buy these bits. He'd have a bunch of them made up. Now, last I looked, you could get them from William Eng and his website. I'll put a link in the description. So anyway, I think I'm ready to go. I've got the speed set lower. You don't want to run something this big at full speed. It's set at 16,000. John used to say 13,000, but I think 16 works okay. You definitely want to make sure your collet's nice and clean when you do this, because any dirt in there can maybe slightly put the bit in crooked, and you definitely don't want that spinning out of balance. So I think we're ready to go here.